The story that we're looking at this morning is pretty simple, and I think the moral of the story is pretty straightforward. But before we get to that, I just want to make some observations about the story. The first observation that I want to make is that it might not be clear from the story itself, but the story is set within the temple. The word that most translations use to translate offering box most likely refers to this money box that we see in the temple. Now, traditions tell us that there were probably 13 of these money boxes spread out throughout the temple courtyard. Now, these money boxes, they're not small wooden money boxes that you see at the back of the sanctuary. These were probably big boxes made out of bronze. They would have had this large trumpet-shaped structure that people would come up and throw their money into. Now, they didn't have Venmo. They didn't have a QR code that you could use to give online. They didn't even have dollar bills. They had coins. And so if you wanted to give money, it would have been apparent. You would go up to the money box, you would throw it into this copper structure, it would hit the copper, you'd get this large clang, and it would echo out throughout the temple through this trumpet-like structure. Now, Jesus tells us that the widow gave 2 coins. In some translations, they tell us that she gave 2 lepta, and so a lepton is about 1/8 of a penny, and she gave 2 of them. So the widow's gift is less than a penny. Now, how does Jesus know that she gave these 2 coins? Well, she would have thrown it into the money box and it would have made 2 little chink, chink. Imagine if anyone else was there at the temple watching that woman come up to the offering box. You can imagine that they would look at this woman and wonder, what could she possibly offer to the temple? But when they heard the sound of her 2 little coins hitting the money box, it would have made total sense to them. She was giving nothing more than what they would have considered as pocket lint. A second observation that I want to make about this story is in the context of where Luke puts this story. Beginning in Luke 19, Jesus spends his entire time in the temple. Immediately after coming into Jerusalem in Luke 19, he goes straight to the temple. He runs the money changers out. They leave the temple. And in their place, the religious leaders come in. They question Jesus' teaching. They push against his authority. All of Luke 20 is made up of a dispute between Jesus and these religious leaders. Immediately after our story, in verse 5, Jesus predicts the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple along with it. So our little story in Luke 21, verse 1 through 4, is the only positive story in this larger section that's full of conflict and judgment. These 4 little verses are like a ray of sunshine coming out of a cloudy sky with this impending storm brewing in the Gospel of Luke. Jesus comes into the temple and he looks around the temple courtyard and he sees a lot of things that are wrong in the temple. But he looks and he sees this widow and he commends her and he commends his gift. You know, throughout the gospel, Jesus is continually lifting up the lowly. He's bringing down the proud. And I think Luke puts this story here just to remind us that in the midst of judgment, God still vindicates the humble. A final observation that I want to make about the story is at the heart of the story, we have a contrast between the wealthy on the one hand and our one widow on the other. Luke introduces the wealthy in verse 1, but the focus of the story is really on the widow's poverty. The word to describe her poverty in the Greek text, it's only used once. It only occurs here to refer to this woman. It's actually a superlative that emphasizes her poverty. That's a grammarian's way of saying that this woman was really, really poor. The coins would have been the smallest currency available. In most translations, in verse 4, Jesus calls this her livelihood or her means of living. The Greek phrase is pantatan bion, and the word bios there, it means life. We get words like biology and biography from that. The phrase literally means these 2 coins are her entire life. It's everything. It's her net worth. It's everything that she owns. This woman is extremely poor. I think she's probably one of the poorest characters in the Gospel of Luke. Another contrast that we get between our widow and the wealthy is in verse 3. Jesus commends the widow for giving more than anyone. Now, this is what I call Jesus math. This is probably the most insignificant gift that anybody could have given. But in response to her 2 coins, Jesus says she's given more than any of the wealthy. And one last contrast we see in verse 4, and I think this is where Luke is driving in the story. Jesus tells us why he commends her. He says she gives out of her poverty while the wealthy are giving out of their abundance. Now, the phrase here that Jesus uses to describe the wealthy means what has abounded to them. What has abounded to them? And I think when Jesus uses that phrase, what has abounded to them, it's an admission that all we have, we all have to make this admission. Everything that we have comes from God in the first place. When we give our time, our talents, our energy, all we're doing is giving it back to him who gave it to us in the first place. Now, Jesus doesn't condemn the wealthy for their gifts, but here he notes that the wealthy just give a portion of what they received. The widow gives it all back. So that's it. That's the point of the story. I told you it was simple. The point of the story is her gift reflects an attitude of dependence. It sounds so simple. Just give like the widow. Give with the dependence of God. But giving wholeheartedly like our widow here is tricky. And so I want to spend the rest of our time talking about what I call 3 missteps or 3 pitfalls that we can slip into when we try to give with a whole heart. The first pitfall is what I call the pitfall of self-righteousness, or maybe we could call this the performance trap. The second is what I call the pitfall of a transactional mindset, or the expectation trap. And our last pitfall I want to look at today is the pitfall of pride. When we think about these, and you probably can understand where we're headed with this, you'll think, well, these kind of overlap. Yeah, they do. They're a little different. We're going to tease them out a little bit, but they do overlap. If you're falling into one pitfall, you're at danger into falling into a second one. We might actually find ourselves in all 3 pitfalls at the same time. But I just want to take some time and examine each one on their own so we can think about how to avoid them and how we can give like our widow, give with the dependence of God. Our first pitfall is what I call the pitfall of self-righteousness, or the performance trap. Now, immediately before our story, Jesus condemns the religious leaders for their pride. Just look back one page in Luke 20, verse 46. Jesus says, "Beware of the experts in the law. They like walking around in long robes. They love elaborate greetings in the marketplaces and the best seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' property, and as a show make long prayers. They will receive a more severe punishment." Now, the problem is that the religious leaders are trying to establish their own righteousness before God. They're trying to establish themselves within God's economy. They're trying to establish themselves within God's world. They want to participate in the synagogues, in the temple, but they want to do it in a way that will build themselves up without having to depend on God. The real problem with self-righteousness is that it just skews our reality. Rather than participating in God's kingdom the way that he wants them to, they end up building up their own little kingdom by trying to justify themselves. It looks obvious when we come to the Gospels and we look at the religious leaders and see what they're doing, but it's so easy for us to slip into the same pattern. It's like having a map, and when you look at the map, the "you are here" is in the wrong location. When it's in the wrong location, you misunderstand the relationship between where you are and where you want to go. It's like you're in the mall. You think you're going to the food court. Everybody that's with you, they're not convinced. They're not so sure. They want you to stop and ask for directions. You refuse because you are convinced that you're going in the right direction. You think you're going to the food court, but in reality, you're walking towards the parking garage. Jesus calls these leaders out for being destructive. He says that they devour the widow's house. Now, we can debate what that means, that they devoured the widow's house, but at the end of the day, their mislabeled maps led them to take advantage of the poor, like our widow at the offering box, rather than to take care of them. Another problem is that this self-righteousness leads to this inflated sense of self-worth. The little kingdoms that we build up, that we establish, they're like a house of cards. We can become hypersensitive to any perceived insult that might impact how we value ourselves. We insulate ourselves to protect our little kingdom that we've set up. When it comes under attack, we lash out to defend it. A good indicator that you've fallen into this pitfall of self-righteousness is that when slight injuries become these huge gaping wounds in our life. If you get abnormally upset when someone cuts in front of you or maybe takes credit for work that you think you've done, it may come from this misplaced sense of self-worth. Now, when we fall into this trap, we may not have a giving problem. Look at the religious leaders. They gave faithfully. They gave a lot. We might not have a giving problem. What we might have is a dependence problem. We give to establish our own self-worth. Now, Jesus spent a large part of his ministry trying to convince disciples to readjust their maps. Luke 6:20, he says, "Blessed are the poor, for the kingdom belongs to you." Luke 9:24, "Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it." Luke 13:30, "The first will be last, the last will be first." All these are calls from Jesus for the disciple to readjust their map. The second pitfall that I want to talk about today is what I call a transactional mindset, or what we could call an expectation trap. It's a little different than our first pitfall. While the pitfall of self-righteousness is aimed at justifying ourselves, the expectation trap is when giving gets to the point where we feel some ownership over the gift after it has left our hands. When you give a gift, do you feel like you need to do a post-giving audit of how they're using the gift? Do you want to know what the return on investment is when you give the gift? Now, this is a little different than stewardship. Jesus calls us all to steward our gifts well. But by giving with an expectation, what we're doing is we're seeking control over how that gift might be used. Now, we've all been in this situation where we have a friend and we want to give them the perfect gift. You know the gift, right? You see it in the store, you look at it, you imagine your friend opening it up, and they are excited to have it. It's the one thing that they didn't realize that they needed, but after they receive it, they don't understand how they functioned without it. How often have you given that gift and they open it up and you don't see the reaction that you want? Or you go visit them later and you see the gift, it's on the shelf, it's not open, they're not using it. Maybe worse, you give that perfect gift, and then at the end of the year, it pops up in the white elephant party. You see, we start by giving that gift with no obligation. But then we feel this invisible string tightening, and we realize that maybe there was this unconscious expectation attached to the gift. We begin to feel that there's something there that we're owed. Now, my wife puts a ton of thought into giving gifts. She is a great gift giver. My birthday was a few weeks ago. I just turned 50. Thank you. And she got me a great gift. She got me an amazing gift. She got me this high-end coffee maker. I love it. It grinds the beans. It filters the water. You froth the milk. Let me tell you, every morning I have an Americano. In the afternoon, I have an espresso. My caffeine intake over the past few weeks has taken a pretty significant hit. A few years ago at Christmas, she got me this head shaver. And I never got it out of the box. I never pulled it out of the box. Ever so often, my wife will bring up that head shaver in conversations with a little bit of fire, right? A little bit of an edge. You see, my wife gave me that head shaver with the expectation that I would use it, I would enjoy it, I would love it, I would maintain my sense of style with it, but I still haven't gotten it out of the box. She gave it to me with an expectation, albeit a good one, but it's still an expectation that I would use it. Now, we don't just attach these strings of expectation to people, we attach them to our future as well. We might give because we hope to secure some specific version for our lives, or we work hard for a specific plan, but we refuse to open ourselves up to any change that God might have for us. A lot of you are in ministry, or you're headed in that direction. You'll give your time, your energy to a church, but then the leadership might pivot to meet a need, a good need, but they'll pivot in an unexpected way. You might be here investing a ton of time and money in a major, hoping to go into a field that's going to change the world, but you find yourself working in a coffee shop. If these changes cause a deep, bitter resentment, it's a sign that maybe you've given that time, that energy, with a set of expectations. What drives this transactional mindset is a desire for stability. We want to stay in our own little comfort zone. We want to know that if I give X, Y will return to me. It's a subtle attempt to try to control our lives, but we all know that control is an illusion. Take a look at the older brother in the story of the prodigal son. The older brother gives with this transactional mindset. Now, you all know the story. The prodigal son abandons the father, but then he comes home. The father throws him a big party, but where is the older brother? He's out in the field complaining about the father. Even though it's characteristic for the father to throw a party to celebrate for his lost son, he's shocked that his father's throwing a party for this degenerate boy. And even though everything that the father owns belongs to him, he's angry that the father hasn't given him this very specific gift of a goat to celebrate with his friends. You see, the older brother has fallen into this pitfall of a transactional mindset. He claims he's given everything to the father, but he's dismayed when his expectation is missed. And so here's the danger of this transactional mindset when we see it in the older brother. The older brother treats his father as if he were a servant getting his wages rather than a son. And so that's the problem. Now look at the widow's gift. She gives everything to the temple, but in the very next section, Jesus predicts the temple will be destroyed. Now personally, if I were there, I would tell the widow to keep the coins. Why give it to an institution that's about to be destroyed? But Jesus still calls her gift a win. This transactional mindset has good intentions, but the theology is wrong. It's a good thing to steward our 2 coins so that they can go as far as they can, But this transactional mindset is rooted in this theology of scarcity. We believe that all we have are these 2 coins, and we want to get the most out of them. But what we forget is that we worship a God that has 1,000 cattle on 1,000 hills. God's not just limited to these 2 coins. Jesus sees the wealthy, but he commends the smaller gift, not because of the purchasing power. What did God do with these 2 coins? He didn't sustain the temple. Right? He uses them to teach. We don't know what the largest gift was that day, but he didn't use that to sustain the temple. But the 2 coins, they're still paying off. There's no way we could have imagined what return those 2 coins would have given us when the widow put them in today. Our third pitfall is what I call the pitfall of pride. Now, we don't know what happened to the widow after she gives her gift, but I know what I would have done if I were there. I'd be there with my 2 coins. I would have navigated the pitfall of self-righteousness. I would have navigated this transactional pitfall, this expectation trap, and I would have put my 2 coins in the box, and I would have looked around, and I would have seen Jesus over here talking to his disciples, and I'd kind of walk over and try to listen into what he's saying, and maybe I'd overhear him commend me, and it would go straight to my head. I'd be like, yeah, that's right. That was pretty great. Look how humble I am. And that's how fast you can slip into this trap. As soon as you win the game of humility, you lose it. It's gone. So what can we do? How can we avoid these pitfalls? The widow shows us a different path. Look at the posture that she gives. When you only have 2 coins and you commit to give them away, you're not trying to manage your life anymore. You're putting yourself in a position to trust God to take care of your needs. At the end of the day, we're not giving to God to show our unrighteousness. We can't do that. We don't give as a transaction to secure some future. It's out of our control. We give out of a dependence on him. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for all that you've given us. Thank you for the amazing gifts that you've given each of us. God, I pray that you'll guide us as we seek to steward these gifts. God, care for us as we leave here. God, care for these students as they bring their semester to an end. God, we love you so much, and we pray these things in your Son's holy name. Amen.
Discover who you're called to be at Biola University, a leading Christ-centered university in Los Angeles, with programs on campus and online. Subscribe for more of our videos and learn more at biola.edu.